Have you ever paid for a seat you rightfully earned, only to be treated like an intruder? Have you ever walked into a space where every glance seemed to push you out, not because you did anything wrong, but simply because they believed you didn't belong? That morning, she stepped into first class, a tailored suit, polished shoes without a single scuff, a ticket booked weeks in advance. But there was no welcome, only a few muffled laughs, prying stares, and the sickly sweet voice of a flight attendant. Perhaps you're mistaken. First class isn't for everyone. You know that feeling, don't you? The feeling of being made small in a room you paid to be in. The feeling that no matter how hard you worked, no matter what you sacrificed, even your money couldn't buy respect. But this story isn't about pain. It's about resolve, the quiet, unshakable resolve of someone who knows exactly who they are. And then, just 15 minutes later, that shining first-class cabin. It was empty, not because she was thrown out, but because she ordered the entire plane cleared. What could have happened in those 15 minutes? And how did a woman who seemed humiliated become the one who made an entire aircraft bow to her? If you've ever felt pushed out of a place where you truly belonged, stay. Because this story will show you that sometimes justice doesn't need to scream. It only needs one powerful moment to flip the entire world upside down. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe everyone deserves respect. Now, let's step into the story. Monica Reed climbed the narrow stairs into the first-class cabin like she was stepping into a closed-door audition. Not for security, for scrutiny. The kind that strips you bare before you even sit down just with a glance. Her charcoal gray suit hugged her frame with understated elegance. In one hand, she carried a worn leather briefcase, edges frayed with time. A quiet reminder that success doesn't always need to glitter. No flashy jewelry, no visible emblems of status. Nothing that said she belonged in the kind of space first class was used to. And that made her an anomaly in this golden-lit chamber. Eyes followed her covert, but piercing. A man folded his newspaper, flashing an immaculate watch, then cast her a glance as if he were filing her away, not the usual first-class type. A woman adjusted her silk scarf, scanning Monica from head to toe with a polite smile and blade-sharp eyes. Monica felt it all, every pair of eyes, every unspoken assumption placing her in the same box. She doesn't belong here. The calm of first class turned tight and heavy. She'd been here before in boardrooms where no one acknowledged her, at doors that slammed shut simply because no one believed a black woman had business entering. It all came rushing back, not as scattered cuts, but one throbbing wound stitched into her being. She took a long breath, letting the ache settle into armor. The ticket in her hand said it all. First class, assigned seat. Monica walked toward it, not rushed, not hesitant. Every step a statement, I have the right to be here. But sometimes, presence alone is not enough. She felt the undercurrent. This cabin wasn't just a physical space, it was territory. Built with money, maintained by status, and defended by the silent entitlement of those who clutched both like breath. Today, Monica had entered forbidden ground. She set down her bag, preparing to take her seat. That's when she heard a quiet cough. The rustle of someone standing behind her. A figure approached. Footsteps heavy as if they carried a warning. You're in the wrong seat. Then came the line polished enough to avoid offense, sharp enough to tighten the air. You sure about that? Everyone knows this seat isn't for, well, you know. Monica looked up. A man, mid-50s, soft belly behind a tailored blazer, deep red tie knotted like a statement. He didn't need to elaborate. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. She met his gaze measured, respectful, not submissive, not provocative. Just enough. I believe I'm in the right seat, she said evenly, but beneath that calm was a storm she knew all too well, the one men like him always tried to summon. You're small. You're out of place. Like clockwork, a flight attendant appeared, efficient, cooperative, standing beside him like backup. She may have boarded the wrong cabin. Let me check your ticket, ma'am. The air tipped not toward truth, but toward power. Monica handed her ticket over, printed clearly, first class. But the attendant barely glanced at it, like it weighed no more than a gas station receipt. We'll handle this shortly, but in the meantime, would you mind standing to avoid inconveniencing our other passengers? Each word sugar-coated but dull-bladed and pressing. From across the aisle, a whisper and a stifled laugh. Two women shared a smile. Monica knew that smile. She'd seen it in rooms where her presence felt like a misprint, part mockery, part pity, and like before, it cut. But this time, she used the blade as leverage. She didn't move. She smiled. A smile they might mistake for compliance, but really, it was silent satire. "Isn't it interesting," she said quietly, "how easily people assume the right to decide where others belong?" The silence grew heavy. The attendant fumbled. The man cleared his throat, not used to resistance, served with poise. Monica wasn't the woman they thought they could quietly corner. And in that moment, she made her decision. If they wanted to turn this cabin into a battlefield, she'd show them she didn't just know how to hold her ground, she could reclaim theirs, too. She locked eyes with him, not defiant, not bitter, just steady like a mirror reflecting his arrogance back to him. And then she smiled again, a smile you couldn't quite read. Was it surrender challenge, or just fatigue from playing this same old scene? "I suppose we'll find out soon enough," she said, voice soft as smoke, "whose seat this really is." He frowned. That wasn't the response he'd expected. He wanted retreat or a loud reaction, something to justify calling security, but this unsettled him. The attendant cleared her throat again, trying to reassert control. "Ma'am, if you don't comply, we'll have to do what Monica cut in." Her voice wasn't loud, but it landed like a pin dropping in a courtroom. The attendant froze, glancing around, searching for backup. No one came. Monica turned back to the man. "I get it," she said. "Places like this are used to certain faces, certain styles. So when someone walks in who doesn't match, the first assumption is must be a mistake." She laughed, softly, but the salt in it stung. He opened his mouth, then shut it. He had no words, no arguments that wouldn't unravel his own bias. Monica tilted her head slightly, like she'd just remembered something worth smiling at. "Luckily," she said, holding up her ticket, "this seat says otherwise, and we're about to find out who really doesn't belong." She leaned back, crossed her arms, signaling the end of the conversation. But in that silence, no one could predict what was truly unfolding inside her or what, precisely, was about to happen. Some fight with shouting, others with fury. Monica fought with stillness, with certainty, and with a calm so deliberate, it felt like prophecy. In just 15 minutes, the woman they tried to erase with politeness would make every first-class passenger rise from their seat one by one. Monica barely had a moment to settle into her seat when a woman's voice rang out from across the aisle, sharp, steady, and just condescending enough to belong more in a conversation about hors d'oeuvres than with another human being. Maybe she got a discount ticket by mistake. Monica didn't need to look. She already knew. A woman in her 40s, blonde curls perfectly set, silk scarf tied neatly around her neck, diamond rings catching the light with every careless motion. She wasn't speaking to Monica. She turned toward her companion. Voice just loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, but calculated enough to deny any direct offense. "I wasn't talking to her." That kind of plausible deniability was its own kind of weapon. Laughter rippled through first class like a familiar seasoning. First a chuckle or two, then sniffed laughter. A glance exchanged, and suddenly a quiet agreement settled over the cabin. She doesn't belong. No one defended her. No one thought it needed to stop. From the moment Monica entered, the cabin had closed ranks, and now she was the shared centerpiece of an unspoken consensus about what an outsider looks like. The cold crept in through her bones. This wasn't the first time she'd been treated like a misplaced object, but the unified silence of strangers. That moment when people who've never met collectively decide you don't belong had a particular weight. It didn't just isolate you, it turned you into a mirror, so they could admire the comfort of their own superiority. She remembered her early days in business, the parties where people asked what department she worked in, not knowing she was the keynote speaker, the limp handshakes, the polite smiles that turned to cold refusals the moment credentials were revealed. It all came back now like an icy gust. But this time, she didn't shrink. Monica turned to the scarfed woman, offering a smile so polite it bordered on satire. Fascinating how some people can gauge the value of a ticket just by looking at who's sitting in the seat. Her tone was casual, like commenting on the weather, but beneath it lay a scalpel cutting through the velvet curtain of first-class etiquette. A few passengers looked away, suddenly interested in their phones. The laughter died, and in that pause, abrupt and sour, Monica knew she'd shifted the weight in the room, even if only slightly. But the battle wasn't over. She could feel it behind the tight smiles and averted eyes. First class was loading its next strike. Monica wasn't in a rush. She inhaled deeply, letting the tension settle, then said calmly, "Sometimes what people mistake as being beneath them is actually them standing at the bottom." The words dropped like a pebble into a still lake, not loud enough to shatter, but enough to send ripples no one could ignore. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't name names, but the message was clear. Your judgment doesn't come from nobility, it comes from how low you're standing. The scarfed woman gave a soft laugh, part mockery, part surprise. "Oh, she's philosophical now," she whispered, not too loud, not too soft, but perfectly placed so everyone could hear. Laughter crackled again, this time more performative, as if passengers had found a rare form of in-flight entertainment. Monica leaned back in her seat and let them think they'd won, because she understood nothing satisfies the arrogant more than overpowering someone in a place they think they own. But that moment of smugness was precisely when Monica realized she was in control. She tilted her head toward the woman, smiling gently. "Isn't it something? How people always laugh at the things that touch what they're too afraid to face. A line like a blade slipping through the polished armor of those who thought they stood above." Silence again, just for a beat, but long enough for Monica to hear the stuttered breathing around her. Phones were suddenly captivating, books fascinating, but everyone was listening now to the woman who'd just sliced into the cracks in their pride. This was no longer about a seat. Monica knew it. Every word she spoke, every action she chose, was her way of reminding them. She wasn't some outsider begging to belong. She stood as their equal, if not higher, because she knew something they didn't. They were never the ones who decided who belonged. But just as she finished, she felt a shift in the air. Gone was the condescending ease, replaced by something else, guardedness. A quiet alarm had been tripped. The powerful don't lose easily, and she could sense it. The next move was coming. Monica didn't respond further. This wasn't about debate. The exchange was just the sketch, the outline of something more. She opened her bag, pulled out her phone, scrolled quickly to a contact, a name that most people in this cabin, even the confident ones, would pale if they saw. She typed a message, short, no emojis, no explanations, just a cold, precise instruction. She hit send. One word flashed on screen. If anyone had looked closely, they might have seen the faint curve at the corner of her mouth. Not a smirk, not a victory grin, just the quiet confirmation that the real game had just begun. Around her, first class resumed its routine. The scarfed woman resumed small talk. The red-tied man flipped a page in his paper, but Monica knew they were still watching, waiting for her to cry, to lash out, to stumble so they could prove she didn't belong. She gave them nothing. No rage, no collapse. Only the kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable. That was her power, the kind of power this cabin had never encountered. The power of someone who didn't need noise to claim her place. She let them sink into their false comfort, while the truth that would silence them all, was already in motion. A flight attendant walked by, eyes glancing her way with caution. Monica looked up, met her gaze, and smiled. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Enjoy these last few minutes, they're not going to last. No one knew what was in that message, but Monica did. And that was enough to make every sneer, every chuckle, feel like echoes in a room that was already crumbling. Because just like she predicted, within 15 minutes, this first-class cabin would know exactly who they laughed at. And what it cost them. Monica tilted her head back, leaned into her seat, and closed her eyes. To the outside, she looked like someone trying to catch a nap or maybe quietly removing herself from a tense atmosphere. But inside her, a storm was gathering. Not a storm of rage, but of silent, calculated resolve. She heard everything. The whispered comments meant to sound private, but loud enough for anyone willing to listen. She's probably fishing for drama, wants to sue, a man muttered, low but laced with disdain. These types always do try to turn every situation into their moment. A woman replied, laughing lightly like she was sharing a juicy secret. Monica had heard these kinds of exchanges too many times before. People secure in their place always found it easy to turn someone else into entertainment, a way to justify their prejudice, to avoid confronting the fact that they were wrong. These whispers weren't meant to understand her. They were rehearsed lines, meant to reinforce the narrative that she was trouble, that she was stooping low to gain attention or advantage. She remembered a meeting from years ago. A major corporation had invited her in. The moment she stepped into the boardroom, someone asked if she was the assistant. That day, she had smiled and introduced herself as the lead on the project they were hoping to win. That memory fit into the present like a well-worn puzzle piece, a reminder, this isn't just a first-class cabin, it's a stage. And everyone here is playing a role, the role of the gatekeeper, the defender of privilege. But unlike them, Monica wasn't acting. She was waiting. A flight attendant passed by, giving her a glance, part wary, part unsettled. Maybe it was because Monica didn't react like the other passengers they'd humiliated. She wasn't angry. She wasn't begging. She was just still. And that stillness made her unreadable. Under the thin blanket across her lap, Monica tightened her fist ever so slightly. The message had been sent. Now, she waited for the other pieces to move. Let them whisper. Let them sneer. Let them enjoy the illusion that they were in control. Because in just a few minutes, every single one of those whispers would be silenced. And right when the first-class cabin had fully slipped into its self-satisfied comfort, an unexpected sound rang out. A tone soft but piercing, and just like that, the laughter stopped. Monica kept her eyes closed, but her mind was far away back to an afternoon years ago, when she was just a young founder with borrowed shoes and a dream she wasn't sure would ever take flight. She remembered the boardroom glass walls gleaming, a wooden table so long it felt like a runway. They'd invited her to pitch an idea, and Monica, fueled by data and sleepless nights, thought this was her chance. But the moment she walked in, a man, salt and pepper hair, expensive tie, a hollow smile looked her over and said gently, "We're afraid. You don't quite match the image we had in mind for our brand. It's a great idea, but we also have to consider the feeling it gives our clients when they see who represents it. Monica hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. She understood. They couldn't imagine a black woman as the face of something premium. To them, she was a smudge on the clean, white surface they were protecting, and then they'd asked her to leave before the pitch even began. That pain hadn't cut like a knife. It burned slow, deep, seeping into her bloodstream. But Monica learned how to turn that burn into something else. Steel. Steel that carried her through rejections, through suggestions that she find someone else to represent the company it'll be easier for fundraising, through every side-eye she received for walking into rooms where no one expected her. That same steel was holding her steady now, right here, in this first-class cabin, surrounded by scoffs, among people trying to push her into the rows behind them. Monica opened her eyes, stared ahead. She wasn't in that boardroom anymore. She didn't need permission to be heard. Now, she was the reason others held their breath. And just as if fate wanted to punctuate that truth, the intercom chimed. A soft ding, followed by an announcement that would shift every eye in the cabin toward her. Not with disdain, but with a nervous uncertainty. The announcement ended. Then a flight attendant approached her stance rigid, like bracing for impact. She placed her hand on the seat in front of Monica, steadying herself, and said in a strained, overly polite voice, "If you don't vacate the seat, we'll have to remove you." No more suggestions, no more veiled pleasantries. They were invoking the power they believed was absolute, the authority to decide who gets to stay. Monica opened her eyes fully. Light reflected off her pupils, dark, deep, unmoving. She looked up at the flight attendant, not with challenge, but with a calm so intense. It made it hard for the other woman to breathe steadily. "You're right," Monica said softly, so quietly that nearby passengers leaned in. "Someone will be removed. But it won't be me." The silence that followed could have been cut with a blade. The attendant frowned slightly, as if not quite grasping what she meant. The man with the red tie lowered his paper. The scarfed woman gave a smug little laugh. "Oh, great. Here we go again." Monica tilted her head, slowly scanning the room, reading reactions. "It's always amusing," she said evenly, "how people think they're forcing someone out, and don't realize they're the ones about to be asked to leave." Her words hit like a slap with no sound. She didn't raise her voice, but every syllable rang out like a bell clear, confident, undeniable. The murmurs died. Even the indifferent passengers started to glance her way, curiosity and unease blending in their eyes. The flight attendant opened her mouth, then closed it again. Something in Monica's eyes made it impossible to speak. There was an invisible weight in her stillness, a presence that neutralized authority. Monica leaned back, looked forward as if the conversation had ended. But she knew. The wire was stretched taut, and when it snapped, everything would shift. And just like she predicted, in a matter of minutes, it would. Not through argument, not through chaos, but through a single order that would make everyone in that cabin realize. The woman they were trying to expel was the only one with the power to remove them all. 15 minutes later, a familiar chime echoed from the overhead speaker, that standard, polite ding heard on every flight. But this time, it rang like a bell from another world. All the passengers looked up almost in unison, expecting a delay announcement, a weather update, perhaps even an apology. Instead, what they heard was the captain's voice, calm, deliberate, and leaving no room for misinterpretation. All passengers must deplane immediately. For a moment, first class held its breath. Then, like hail slamming into a quiet lake, the protests came. "Excuse me. You must be joking. I paid for this seat. You can't." Voices collided. The man with the red tie shouted over everyone. Passengers groaned with the entitled disbelief of people who'd never been told no. Amidst the chaos, Monica didn't flinch. Her hand rested calmly on her briefcase. Her gaze was steady fixed on the back of the seat in front of her, as if the captain had just offered complimentary tea. The scarfed woman stood first, screeching, "This is outrageous. Who authorized this?" Flight attendants rushed in, trying to douse the flames with empty phrases due to special circumstances. "We need everyone to disembark. We appreciate your cooperation." But no one was cooperating. The red-tied man stormed forward. "I have a meeting in 2 hours. Do you have any idea how much my time is worth? I will sue this airline into the ground," he roared, his voice cracking with fury, but it moved nothing. And Monica. She stood slowly, brushed a crease from her trousers, as if this moment had been designed specifically for her. One flight attendant approached, about to recite the line, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to—" Monica tilted her head, smiled. The attendant froze. Something about Monica's stillness or certainty made it impossible to treat her like a regular passenger. She said nothing. She didn't need to. In that silence, she had made it clear none of this was unexpected. And in a few minutes, as these passengers lined up to exit, they would begin to understand a far more difficult truth. This flight was never theirs. The man with the red tie, the same one who'd blocked Monica the moment she stepped aboard, was now red-faced and shaking, like a lion whose roar had lost its echo. He shot up from his seat, forehead pulsing, voice raw from shouting. "This is absurd. Where's the manager? I demand an explanation." His bark was loud enough to drown out the remaining murmurs, but instead of clarity, it ignited the room. Other passengers joined in waving tickets, shoving phones forward, raising their voices. "I waited a month for this seat," yelled a woman in a navy blazer. "I have kids at home. I'm not leaving over some joke," snapped another. The flight attendants tried to keep their smiles in place, but their faces had gone stiff. One kept repeating, like a broken recording, "Please cooperate. This is a required procedure for your safety." But no one listened. These were people who were used to being catered to, who were used to being the exception. And now, asked to leave like coach passengers. They couldn't process it. Through the frenzy, Monica stood motionless like a statue, not arguing, not asking questions. When their eyes passed over her, they saw it too, the eerie calm, and it unsettled them. The man with the red tie finally turned to Monica, looking for an ally in his rebellion. "You heard that, didn't you? We have to do something. They can't treat us like misbehaving schoolchildren." Monica looked up, met his eyes, then said, just loud enough for him and those nearby to hear, "Perhaps you've overestimated your place on this flight." She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted him, but the blade cut clean. He froze, speechless. Others turned away, pretending not to have heard. Monica folded her arms and leaned back, signaling the end of the conversation. It wasn't just a comment, it was a warning. She knew in mere moments, when the real reason for the announcement became clear, every passenger screaming in protest would be asking the same question. Who, exactly, had they been yelling at? And then, as the uproar hit its peak, a figure entered the cabin. Not loud, not aggressive, but the effect was instant. The yelling stopped, breaths were held. The red-tied man swallowed hard. The scarfed woman fell silent, her eyes shifting. And in that hush, Monica stood up, not hurried, not rattled. She straightened her sleeve, picked up her bag from the floor. That simple motion, so ordinary, so controlled, made the entire cabin pause. People stopped mid-sentence. Not because they were done shouting, but because they didn't understand what was happening anymore. Monica stepped into the aisle. She didn't dodge their gazes. She didn't lower her head like someone being removed. She walked tall as if the aisle had been cleared for her alone. The red-tied man called out, voice trembling. "What are you doing? You're just leaving. You're not going to protest." She stopped. turned her head, looked him square in the eye. Sometimes, protest doesn't need volume. Sometimes, it's just about knowing when to walk first. And with that, she walked on, leaving behind the stares, the whispers, the unraveling certainty. The scarfed woman muttered something, but her voice had lost its edge. Something about Monica's calm, her certainty, had changed the air in the cabin. When Monica reached the aircraft door, another attendant stood ready, prepared to offer a half-hearted apology. But when their eyes met, the words got stuck. What they saw wasn't someone being dismissed. It was someone who knew exactly where she was going and why. At the base of the stairs, airport wind brushing her face, Monica saw them. A group in dark suits, standing in formation, not checking phones, not pacing, not airport staff. They were waiting for her. As Monica stepped onto the tarmac, they bowed their heads in unison. One man, tall, formal, stepped forward. "We're ready, Miss Reed." Back in first class, confusion still swirled. But down here, everything was crystal clear. Monica wasn't the woman being kicked out of her seat. She was the woman this entire system was built to respond to. And in just a few minutes, when those passengers finally stepped off that plane, they would witness something that would make their wealth, their status, their tantrums look like cheap theater. Because the woman they tried to mock was the one who had the authority to bring the entire flight to a halt. The tarmac, usually buzzing with noise, fell strangely still, as if all sound had been pulled from the air. Monica stood in it, her hair catching the breeze, a few strands escaping the neatness behind her ears. The briefcase in her hand might as well have been an extension of her body. At the top of the stairs, first-class passengers began to trickle down, still wearing the unsettled expressions of those used to being treated special, now forced to line up with everyone else. They barely had time to mutter complaints before a group of individuals in black suits appeared. Leading them was a middle-aged man who approached with confident steps, then slowed as he neared Monica. He bowed his head respectfully and spoke with a tone no one could mistake for anything but sincere reverence. "Apologies for the inconvenience. Ms. Reed, everything should have been better arranged to receive you." The passengers standing behind Monica froze. Some blinked repeatedly, as if trying to reset what they'd just heard. "Miss Reed," the scarfed woman whispered, eyes wide. The red-tied man looked like he'd swallowed his own fury. His once loud mouth clamped shut, the edges now pale. The manager continued, his voice lowered, but still loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've received official notice from the board. Your acquisition as the largest strategic shareholder has just been finalized this morning. Congratulations, ma'am. We deeply regret the oversight." No further explanation was necessary. The revelation fell like a bomb. Monica, the woman they mocked, diminished, treated like an intruder, didn't just belong here. She partially owned the plane they were standing on. A few passengers dropped their gazes, hoping to avoid her eyes, but the more they tried to shrink, the more their shame became exposed. Monica gave a slight nod. "Thank you. I understand some days it's harder for people to do their jobs well." Her voice was gentle, but in its calmness, it reflected every scoff, every condescending whisper, every measured stare they had thrown her way. And suddenly, all of it looked small. She turned to face the red-tied man. Their eyes locked only for a moment, but it was long enough. There was no apology that could unwrite what had happened. Monica smiled a quiet smile that needed no words to say, "Now you know who this seat truly belonged to." But it wasn't over. Not yet. In a few minutes, the people who thought they'd been forgiven would realize Monica wasn't just taking her rightful place, she was about to ensure this flight would never forget this day. She turned back around, standing tall just a few paces now between her and those who had just exited first class. Her shadow stretched long across the cold concrete, sharp and unwavering like the words she was about to speak. Her eyes sought out the red-tied man, the first to block her path, the one who cloaked his dismissal of her behind a polite suggestion. Now he stood slack-armed, caught between offering an explanation and wishing he could vanish. Monica didn't shout, she didn't whisper. Her voice was steady, measured like each word had been weighed. Next time, ask who the seat belongs to before you speak. No one answered. A few passengers tensed, as if hearing a verdict being handed down. The red-tied man opened his mouth, then closed it. He was used to wielding the power of money, but here, in front of this woman, that power looked as flimsy as a misprinted boarding pass. Monica stepped forward not too close, just enough. Enough for her words to land not only on him, but on everyone who had scoffed when she entered that cabin. The funny thing is you all love to believe you belong in that seat. You think the price of the ticket defines the worth of the person sitting in it. But sometimes the seat you treat like sacred ground. Dear. She tilted her head slightly. Her smile was faint, but it carried no warmth. Already belongs to the one you mistook for a trespasser. The scarfed woman, once so quick to mock discount tickets, took in a sharp breath as if to protest. But then, she lowered her head. Said nothing. Monica glanced at her just for a moment, then turned away, not bothering to finish a conversation she'd won before it began. She lifted her chin and scanned the crowd, pausing on each face. Not to humiliate, but to remind them. Every whisper, every judgment, every look thrown her way was now a reflection of them. Perhaps, Monica said, her voice dipping low, people should learn to look closer, before deciding who doesn't belong. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it cut deep, a quiet engraving that shattered the first-class illusion built from smirks and sideways glances. And she wasn't finished. If they thought this ended with a well-worded reminder, they were about to learn a far harder lesson, one about power and limits. Monica stood still, let the silence sit beside her like an ally. No one dared speak. No more giggles about discount seats. No more smug smiles. The room had gone quiet, not with respect, but with uncertainty. She inhaled deeply, then turned toward the manager still standing a few steps away. He hadn't moved, still half bowed, as if before someone more than a customer, before someone with real authority. "We're not done," Monica said. She didn't raise her voice, but the way she said it slow, firm, unquestionable, it dropped like a stone in the chest. The red-tied man flinched. The scarfed woman clutched her handbag tighter. Others glanced around, searching for meaning, finding only the cold creep of dread down their spines. Monica turned to the black-suited team. "We'll talk in the office," she said, as if scheduling a meeting, but her tone made it clear this wouldn't end with apologies. The manager nodded. "It's ready, ma'am." She looked around one last time. No one met her gaze, but Monica knew they all still felt it like a mirror held to their faces, forcing them to confront the arrogance they wore so proudly just moments ago. She didn't walk away yet. She let her presence linger, a living reminder real power doesn't need volume to be heard. She tilted her head, as if weighing one final thought, and spoke slowly so every person could hear her. A seat isn't just a place to sit, it's a test. And today, many of you failed it. No one replied. The words hung in the air, turning the tarmac into a courtroom, and Monica the judge delivering the final ruling. She walked away. The team in black followed. But her words remained etched into every ear, heavy as an unfinished sentence. And soon, when the doors to that office closed behind her, they would all understand. Monica wasn't just here to talk. She was here to make sure this airline and everyone who mocked her learned exactly what it means to cross the wrong woman. The emergency boardroom at the airport was cleared in minutes. Everyone left, senior managers. Assistants stood lined along the walls, silent, eyes down. Monica sat at the head of the table, her briefcase placed beside her like part of a ritual. There was no gavel, no jury box, but everyone in that room felt like they were on trial, because in this room, Monica was both judge and executioner. The highest-ranking airline executive, the same man who had bowed to her on the tarmac, now stood before her. Voice quivering. "We deeply regret what happened. We'll launch an internal investigation and handle this matter according to protocol." Monica cut him off. "You won't need an investigation." The room fell into stillness. She looked him in the eye sharp, unflinching, leaving him nowhere to hide. We all know what happened. A flight crew didn't just fail their duty, they humiliated a customer and a shareholder on property she co-owns. Her voice didn't rise, but every word landed like a steel hammer. The executive tried to steady himself. "We'll address the individuals responsible. Perhaps this was the result of a few bad actors." "No," Monica stopped him. "Not a few bad actors. The system. And I won't let that system continue to represent me." She leaned back in her chair, hands folded, let silence fill the room. Then delivered her judgment. "The entire crew from this flight will be terminated, effective immediately." The only sound was the sharp inhale of people in the room. The executive stood frozen, then tried to object softly. "Ms. Reed, that's a very heavy decision, I'm afraid." Monica tilted her head, a flicker of dry amusement in her eyes. "You're afraid it's hard to handle. I'm afraid keeping them employed would be harder to justify." The sentence cut through every possible rebuttal. No one dared meet her eyes anymore. Because they all knew this wasn't an outburst. It was the decision of someone who held the keys and wasn't afraid to change the locks. Monica stood, closing the meeting with a single, crisp sentence. "If the system doesn't change, I'll change the entire system." And as the boardroom doors clicked shut behind her, the entire airline knew this wasn't personal. It was the beginning of an earthquake. News from the meeting spread faster than any flight on the schedule. Within minutes, first-class passengers began whispering about an emergency meeting and the crew being fired. Speculation rippled through the lounge, twisting into multiple versions, but all centered around one undeniable truth. The woman they had looked down on wasn't just another passenger. Backstage, the flight attendants returned to a small room, faces pale. "The whole team," fired one whispered, voice shaking. Another covered her face. This just ruined my entire career." In the waiting area, the red-tied man had lost his earlier bravado. He slumped into a chair, fingers interlocked, eyes locked on nothing, his fury replaced with dread and confusion. When Monica stepped out of the meeting room, he stood as if by instinct, some last flicker of survival. Who are you?" he stammered. His voice no longer held power, only the tremble of someone who had crossed the wrong person. Monica paused, looked at him, no malice, no fury, just a glance sharp enough to remind him of his place. "I'm simply someone who knows exactly where she stands." She said it like a breeze, but it sliced through him and made him lower his head. The lounge fell quiet. The scarfed woman, once bold in her mockery of discount seats, now pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, as if trying to hide her embarrassment. A young couple avoided Monica's gaze, pretending to be distracted by their phones, but their ears strained to catch every word. No one said anything about wrong seats anymore. No one dared laugh. Because now, they all understood. This woman didn't just have the power to sit in first class. She had the power to decide the fate of the crew and maybe the entire airline. Monica didn't explain herself. She didn't have to. She walked head high, every step a stamp establishing a new order in a space where moments ago they all wanted her out. And the quake wasn't done, because within minutes, Monica would make her next move one that wouldn't just end careers, but rewrite the very skies they thought belonged to them. She stopped at the exit, turned around. The motion was so slow, everyone felt their heart skip a beat. The first-class crowd, those same voices that had demanded justice, now stood clumped together like schoolchildren awaiting discipline. She scanned the room, one face at a time. The red-tied man opened his mouth, then shut it, wilting under her gaze. The scarfed woman sank into her seat, hands trembling despite her effort to appear composed. They all avoided her eyes, as if doing so could erase the words they'd spoken. Monica didn't need to shout. Her voice was low, clear. The person you just tried to belittle is the one signing your checks. The room froze. It wasn't a revenge line. It was a scalpel peeling away the arrogance first class had worn like a uniform. A few people tried to smile, forced, awkward, as if to recast the moment as a misunderstanding. But Monica gave them no escape. "I don't need your apologies. Empty words don't change a thing." She stepped forward, grounded like a monument. "But I do need you to remember this respect isn't something I ask for. It's something I carry, and anyone who disrespects it will pay for it." The sentence hung in the air, a sentence more permanent than any boarding pass. No one replied. The crowd that once boiled over a seating dispute now stood like an exhibit of stripped pride. Monica turned to the group of airline staff still lined against the wall. "You think you were protecting this airline by defending a seat?" She let out a quiet chuckle, not amused, just aware. "This airline won't survive if it can't recognize what's truly valuable." The manager nodded rapidly, scribbling like a student in a crisis. Monica didn't acknowledge him. She'd said what mattered, and they'd have to live with it. She turned, walked away. She didn't need to look back. She knew those eyes would follow her for a long, long time. Not because she was a shareholder, but because they had just witnessed a lesson in power no MBA program had ever taught them. But this still wasn't the end. Because Monica's next decision wouldn't just change the fate of a flight crew, it would reshape how this airline existed. And that would be the final move. The moment they understood she didn't just reclaim a seat, she rewrote the rules. No more noise. No more shouts or muttered smirks. When Monica stepped into the VIP lounge, the air seemed to shift, as if ownership of the room had just changed hands. She placed her briefcase on the table, pulled out her phone, and dialed. Each motion calm, yet heavier than any speech she'd delivered before. "Replace the entire crew on Flight 417, she said. No explanation, no context. Her voice was steady, like she was ordering a coffee. But everyone in the room knew this wasn't a request. It was a command. On the other end, the operations manager replied instantly. "Yes, Ms. Reed, we'll execute that immediately." Monica continued. "I want a full report on the suspended crew. Previous disciplinary records. Passenger feedback from the last 3 years. On my desk by end of day. No stammering. No excuses. Just a string of respectful affirmations. Yes, ma'am, understood, absolutely." She ended the call and set her phone down. A few staff members in the lounge, hiding behind their laptops and paperwork, sneaked glances at her. But these weren't the same eyes from first class. They weren't filled with judgment. They were filled with awareness. This woman wasn't someone they could reach. She was a force they had no tools to measure. Monica took a sip of coffee. Her calm wasn't an act. It was the stillness of someone who no longer needed to raise her voice to be heard. She remembered something a friend once said. When you really hold power, you can whisper, and the whole room listens. Now she understood that. Deep in her bones. Flight 417 no longer belonged to the people who laughed at her. It belonged to her, both literally and symbolically. And when that plane took off again, it would carry a message no one could ignore. Some people sit in first class because they paid for it. Others sit there because they own the sky. But Monica wasn't finished. Her next call wouldn't just change one flight. It would change the way this entire airline operated. And that would be the strike that made the whole system kneel. Minutes later, a senior executive entered the VIP room, looking like he'd sprinted the entire terminal. His tie was crooked, his breath shallow. His eyes darted around, searching for Monica's mood like a weatherman chasing clouds. He opened with another apology. "Ms. Reed, we're truly sorry for your experience today. The airline will do whatever it takes to regain your trust." Monica lifted a hand. He stopped mid-sentence. Her voice didn't rise, but it froze him in place. "You still don't get it," she said. "This isn't about earning back my trust. You're not doing this for me." He hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to being cut off mid-apology. But Monica's eyes were unblinking, cold and sharp and bright all at once. "You should be doing this for the face of this company. Because if I had remained an anonymous shareholder today, none of you would have lifted a finger." She let that truth settle like a verdict, weighted and inescapable. "And that's the problem. You didn't fail me. You failed the meaning of the word service. You've turned first class into a private club, where respect is only extended to familiar faces." Her tone sharpened. "If this company wants to survive, that ends now." The executive nodded rapidly. But Monica wasn't finished. "Remember," she said, "a seat is never just a seat. It's a declaration of how you see your customers. If a black woman is treated as an intruder today, who will it be tomorrow? And what will it cost you when they decide to walk away?" He dropped his gaze. Every word she said etched itself into the table between them. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a lesson. Monica rose, adjusted her blazer with calm precision. "Don't think this is about me," she said. "If it were, I would have walked away and never returned. Do it for the image you claim to protect." The executive had nothing left but a whispered, "Yes, ma'am." But Monica could see it in his eyes. He finally understood. This wasn't about revenge. She was forcing them to confront their reflection. And as she left the room, he knew this wasn't a lesson. It was a warning. If they didn't change, she would change it for them. And it wouldn't be gentle. The VIP lounge had never been quieter. Monica sat in a dark leather chair, hands clasped in her lap, her gaze locked on the window ahead, watching the grounded plane. It sat there like a beast that had been subdued. Her eyes drifted past the runway, past the flickering lights in the distance. To an outsider, it might have looked like she was basking in victory. But inside Monica, there was no joy. Power, she thought, was never the sweet reward people imagined it to be. It was a stone, cold, heavy, and impossible to set down. Every decision she made today wouldn't stop at one plane or one crew. It would ripple, touching hundreds of staff, thousands of passengers, and an entire system conditioned to operate a certain way. She remembered her first day in this world, a girl in a borrowed suit, eyes burning with hope. She had thought, do the work, prove your worth, and the doors will open. But reality had taught her something else. Sometimes the doors stay shut not because you're unworthy, but because the people behind them never wanted you to enter. And today, she hadn't just opened one. She'd shattered it. But the cost was a responsibility she couldn't hand back. She took another sip of coffee, cold now, bitter only in memory. Power isn't a tool for revenge, she whispered to herself. It's a duty to change what others are too afraid to. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them again, sharp, focused, lethal. If this airline believed it could keep running the same way, they were wrong. And if the passengers in first class thought today was just an embarrassing moment to forget, they were wrong too. Monica stood, the weight on her shoulders still heavy, but her stride stronger than ever. Because what came next was no longer just a decision. It would be a declaration. And that declaration wouldn't be made behind closed doors. It would unfold in full view, before the eyes of the world, where everyone would witness how Monica Reed turned a moment of humiliation into a new definition of power. The airport press room was packed. Journalists crowded near the podium, mics raised, camera flashes snapping. The news of a mystery shareholder forcing a plane to land and firing the entire crew had spread like wildfire across social media, igniting curiosity, controversy, and awe. Who was this woman, and how could one shareholder touch the heart of an entire airline like she was rebuilding it from scratch? Then Monica walked in. Gone was the pale gray suit from earlier. She wore a simple black coat, no jewelry, no theatrics, and yet no one mistook her for anyone else. Stillness followed her. The whispers stopped. The room fell silent. She stepped up to the podium. No papers, no prepared speech. "I'm Monica Reed," she said calmly, clearly, not boastful, but enough to hush an entire room. "Today, I'm not speaking as a shareholder. I'm speaking as a passenger and a human being." She scanned the crowd of reporters. This morning's flight wasn't just a flight. It was a portrait of a culture we've tolerated too long, a culture of bias, of misplaced authority, of respect handed out like a privilege. Fingers tapped keyboards, but no one dared interrupt. Monica continued. "I've made a decision, and the board has agreed that as of today, this airline will begin a full restructuring, not just in how we manage crew, but in how we define service. Respect cannot be a reward for looking right, dressing right, or knowing the right people. It must be the baseline for everyone who boards this plane." A reporter asked Ms. Reed, "Where do you plan to begin?" She looked directly into the camera. "By turning this morning's flight into a case study. Every decision, every report, every story from that flight will be used to train and set a new standard. Today marks the moment this airline realizes a seat isn't just something we sell. It's a declaration of how we see human beings." A murmur swept the room. Someone whispered, "She's not getting revenge. She's rewriting the rules." Monica smiled, not a victory grin, but the smile of someone who had just unhinged a door and held it open for others to walk through. But it was what she said next that made the entire room hold its breath. Because it wasn't just a commitment. It was a warning to anyone still clinging to a culture that diminishes others in the skies above. After the press conference, Monica didn't return to the office. A private car took her to a secured hangar, where a plane waited freshly painted with a new logo, a symbol of the restructuring she had just promised to the world. The sky had thickened by late afternoon. Clouds loomed, but streaks of light still slipped through, stretching across the runway. Monica stepped out, heels echoing sharply on the cold concrete. In front of the aircraft, a line of crew stood silently, heads bowed. No words were spoken. None were needed. She climbed the steps, each one deliberate, like notes in a slow, rising melody, leading toward a quiet crescendo. At the entrance to first class, Monica paused. Not to admire luxury, that wasn't new to her. But to absorb the moment. There was a time when she had walked into this space and been looked at like an intruder, when glances cut like knives, when words were barbs hidden in politeness. But now no one questioned if she belonged here. Because her presence wasn't bought, it was carved with ownership, power, and every battle she refused to lose. She took seat 1A, the same one, but this time it felt different. She set down her case, leaned back, closed her eyes for a few seconds, letting peace wrap around her like armor. This wasn't a victory lap. This was a silent declaration. "I'm here, and I've always belonged here." A flight attendant approached with a drink. No hidden contempt behind a courteous smile, only respect. Monica nodded softly. accepted the glass. No more words needed. Outside, cameras still clicked, but Monica didn't look their way. She didn't need this moment captured because the weight of it was already burned into the minds of everyone who had once doubted her. This seat was no longer a question of, does she deserve it? It had become the answer. She opened her eyes and looked out the window. The sky was unfolding in front of her. This isn't just a seat, she thought. This is land I just reclaimed, for myself and for everyone who will come after me. But before the plane began to move, Monica had one more thing to do, a final message to make it clear this was not the end. It was the beginning of a new game with new rules, and she was the one writing them, was the aircraft gently vibrated as engines roared to life. Monica remained still in the seat 1A, gazing out of the window as the last rays of sunlight spilled across the tarmac, casting a cold, breathtaking glow on steel. A flight attendant leaned in, asking if she needed anything. Monica shook her head. This moment was enough. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet. The quiet of a war won without raising a single voice. She remembered the old flight, the smirks, the judgment, the dull knives of words slicing pride. If she had chosen to yell, to argue today would have ended in a meaningless apology. But she didn't choose noise. Sometimes, justice doesn't need volume, just the right seat. The first-class seat beneath her wasn't just a chair, it was a symbol, a reminder that justice isn't about revenge, it's about the right to exist in the spaces people once tried to push you out of. And to do it with such grace that every eye learns to lower itself. Monica picked up her phone, typed a short message to the board. Begin the new training program. Use this morning's flight as the case study. No one will ever be treated the way I was. She hit send, a simple touch but one that would ripple like a wave across the system. She leaned back, closed her eyes again. This time, she saw the faces of other black women, women who were once made to feel they didn't belong. They would board future flights, sit in seats just like this one, and know. They had nothing to prove except their presence. The plane began to taxi. Monica opened her eyes, watching the sky open before her. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate. This wasn't an ending. This was the start of new rules she had written with her story. And as the plane lifted from the ground, Monica knew. As long as doors were closed by prejudice, she would keep opening them, not with noise, but with the quiet weight of the right seat. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.